Hi everyone, my name's Dr. Patricia Morgan and it's great to be here with you. Thank you so much for your attention. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people, the traditional custodians of the land where I'm standing. I pay respects to elders past and present, to all of the Gadigal peoples, and respects to the traditional custodians of the land where we are. This is an overview of my presentation today, which has 3 sections. The first offers some definitions, starting with the metaphor of rivers and floodplains to describe subjective experience. In the second section, I speak about the need to acknowledge and engage subjective experience in the new economy. And in the third and final section, I offer some suggestions for how to integrate subjective awareness into our work in the new economy. Looking for a definition of the subjective, I started with dictionaries where I found multiple and at times conflicting understandings of the subjective. Though it's often portrayed in definitions that emphasise one or other end of a continuum, bounded by unconscious drives at one end and a field of metacognitive awareness at the other. Whichever it is, the subjective landscape is common to us all, significant or if at times unrecognised in everything that we do, and the deep wellspring of our being. Importantly, the inner and the outer interweave each other as we cycle through subjective experience, which then impacts the outer, and then objective or outer impacting the subjective or inner. I developed the metaphor of rivers and floodplains to define subjective experience because of this cycling. In this way, I depict it as a river that runs from the inner landscape through our objective or everyday outer experience to then return and lay down patterns of alluvial subjective soil. This then reforms our inner landscape and the patterns that we perceive the world through. In contemplative inquiry, the field that I work in, the subjective or preconceptual is described as first-person experience. Next is second person or intersubjective experience, and then third person, outer or cognitive consciousness. Importantly, this isn't a hierarchy with one state of consciousness thought of as more important than the other. It's more like this image where the first person is the dark blue, the second person the red, and the third person the brown, so each aspect intersperses the other. The problem is that we now live in a world which privileges person and marginalises first person. Problematically, the first person or subjective is foundational in learning, transformation, and all that we do. Developing a relationship with our inner world through, for example, contemplative practices like meditation and yoga is important when working in the new economy. Working with groups that are seeking to make significant positive change in the world. For we not only want what we create to be equitable, inclusive and democratic, but that the consciousness we work through in doing this is healthy and balanced, and that the processes we engage with others to create a new economy are also balanced, considered and equitable. This starts, I believe, with each of us strengthening our relationship with our inner worlds. So it's important to understand when engaging our subjectivities that they're comprised of many aspects, such as experiences and memories. And here I am as a young child and us kids with mum. I was a young single parent. Here I am with my son. I was a working artist working in my inner world for many years. And lastly, here I am celebrating my PhD. So these are 4 significant aspects of my life that are, if you like, running through me all the time. Experiences as a young adult with a small child, experiences as a working artist where I was often engaging my inner world, and experiences in my body. This image represents the proprioceptive and interoceptive experiences, my mind and the mental world that's happening at a preconceptual space in the interior, emotions, and the spiritual and transcendent. So all of these are mixing together all the time. They're creating patterns that we look through the world at, that we engage the world in. And these are very significant in our engagement in the new economy. So if we acknowledge the presence of the subjective and the way that it influences our outer experience and then our actions, we can start to understand its relevance in the new economy. Importantly, this relates to the idea of the patterns laid down in us and how we see and engage the world through these patterns. The problem is we may not be aware of these patterns and therefore how our subjectivities impact our lives and all that we engage. In addition, our ability to trace back and feel or change our inner prompts has been atrophied by the accelerating pace of life and increasing use of information technology, or ICT. Many of us are now living through fragmented attention and have a very distant relationship with our inner landscape. If we want to work together to effect positive change, it's important to gain access to our internal landscape. I've identified 3 aspects to this with regard to our work in the new economy. Firstly, returning balance, that is, maintaining equal focus on the inner and outer in our relationship with ourselves. Secondly, bringing the same awareness to exchanges with our friends and colleagues in the new economy. And thirdly, then awareness to our subjectivities and those of the individuals we work with outside of the new economy, in community, political, economic, social and environmental spheres. So significant here is the understanding of our subjective preconceptual experience as a fundamental ground of learning and transformation. This is an important aspect of subjective experience to advance in the new economy, particularly with regards to devising the programs we're using to create change. For to create deep change, we need to work with the foundational subjective space of transformation. Subjective experience is at the heart of all the decisions we make and how we act in the world. If we're to support deep systemic change, it needs to start in deep preconceptual engagement with the very ground of that change. I'd like to now speak a bit about some of the links between the marginalisation of subjective experience and the new economy. Interestingly, the fragmentation of our ability to focus, reflect and be present to the subjective foundations of our actions has paralleled the rise of neoliberalism and hypermateriality. This relates in part to the negative impacts of Cartesianism that drew the mind out of the body, the spirit out of nature, and that it exiled our subjectivities. The negative outcomes of Cartesian thinking can be seen in our fragmented attention and in the imbalance of current economic systems, which arise, I believe, out of the imbalance of our inner and outer ecologies. As nature has been mathematised, as Mark Horkheimer describes it, as the creative and contemplative have been marginalised, and as we've moved away from individual and collective ritualised practices that once provided entry to the floodplains of our deep selves, so our ability to engage all of ourselves and all life has diminished. This disconnection from our subjectivities is now exacerbated by the accelerating pace of life and constant connectivity through ICT. In brief, hypermaterialism and constant connectivity encourages fragmented attention or constant partial attention. This means our ability to focus and reflect are impaired and we have less awareness of the deeper parts of ourselves, the parts that ground our values and motivations. In the worst case scenario, this makes us easier to control. In the best, we're more inclined to act in reactive or unreflective ways, driving for action or application before reflection. While our actions may aim to bring about positive change, the processes we go through, including those in which we're interacting with others, plus the outcomes might not be congruent with our individual and collective values and initial goals. In this last section, I concentrate on subjective approaches to the individual, the new economy, and to collective change, starting with the individual. My understanding of our work in the new economy is to return a holism to human endeavours, providing ways for the mind and body to integrate, honouring the wholeness of nature, not just instrumentalising it, offering ways to understand, honour and engage the whole person, not just instrumentalising them. There are many aspects that need to be considered in such an approach, and I believe subjective consciousness needs to be one of them. I'm not suggesting that the subjective then dominates, but that a balance is returned, that our inner ecologies are rebalanced by giving more time to our subjective experience, which in turn leads to more balanced and healthy relationships with all ecologies. To build a sustainable and holistic new economy, we need to redress the imbalances. Firstly, in our own ecology, by adopting practices that renew our relationship with our inner or subjective landscapes. The practices I use are meditation and yoga, and there are many types and styles of meditation and yoga, and many other somatic contemplative practices such as Aikido and Tai Chi. There are also practices such as contemplative walking and reading, and mindfulness in daily life such as mindful eating. Some people find sport and gardening meditative. Anything really that helps you move out of the outer discursive consciousness and into a more reflective inner awareness, and that you do regularly. This will strengthen your relationship with your inner world. This reverses a common focus in change-making where external action can be foregrounded. I think both are important, but currently there can be an overemphasis on the external and cognitive, on action and application with little time for reflection and paying attention to process. By taking a more balanced approach that engages the inner and outer, and by strengthening our relationship with the inner, if it has diminished, helps us resist fragmentation and manipulation. Just one example of this type of manipulation can be seen in the design of cell phones and social media, aspects of which are described as hacking human psychology. In the Pervasive Technology Lab at Stanford University, designers are taught the principles of behaviour design. In these programs, they learn to design the psychological condition, where, for example, users are rewarded with an instantaneous like after they post a photograph to a social media site. This reinforces their action and their desire to post more photographs and therefore use their phones or other devices more, and in turn buy more devices. The understanding of strengthening our relationship with our inner worlds to resist this kind of manipulation leads into the second aspect of helping us integrate subjective experience into the new economy. This is the suggestion that it will be useful to pay attention to collective processes in the new economy as well as its products. For example, the ways that we communicate. It will be helpful to engage methods that emphasise reflective communication and therefore address subjective aspects of us. Healthy communication, a vital ingredient in change making, can simply be assumed and then ignored in the rush for action and outcome. To avoid this, it's useful to commit to the use of practices such as nonviolent communication, prosociality, and insight dialogue. Having a strong relationship with our subjective life leads to meta-awareness, both of the patterns we act through and of our values. Starting from this space, working from values, from more reflective and less fragmented consciousness, and then integrating processes that encourage this in others, we're more likely to provide information and create programs that touch into the subjectivities of the people we work with outside of the new economy. Put simply, it's about the consciousness we work from. If we have clear access to this space, and if it is balanced, whole, and calm, the more likely it is that we will produce balance, wholeness, equality, and peace. Thank you. I've come to the end of my presentation, and thank you so much for your attention.